Alright, so I've been thinking about making this video for a while, and I might make similar videos for other decks, but this is a self-damage mulligan guide. So I have the deck list that I currently like most for this deck right here, and I just wanted to go over some of the key concepts. So the cards you are primarily looking for, and I will go into the matchup dependencies a little later on. Red Dawn, Bloody Sickle, Winter Warfare are all pretty good. Winter Warfare, particularly, being niche to where it is applicable. Recon, Engineers, Zukov, 456, T80, Yak, and then it starts to get into like, well, if you have early game to support into the curve, it's also nice to have things like the SU and the Pelyakov. Past that, sometimes Scouting Party. Past that, you're probably not going to keep, except for D4 guards. For D4 guards, even when you don't see the synergy in the self-damage to support it already, is often a really good keep, because, I mean, it is the cornerstone of your deck, right? And even if it's coming out a few turns later, if you're getting a 0 mana 6/6, well, 0 credit 6/6, I should say, that's a really good deal, and you want to take that whenever you can. So, to go into a few more matchups specifically, I've selected a few hands that you might see. So, let's say you face up against a Germany opponent on ladder. You're going first, and these are the first 4 cards you see in your mulligan. So you have a Bloody Sickle, Engineer Battalion, Recon, and an SU. So, what would you keep in this scenario? So, the first thing to consider is that Germany on ladder, you're most likely facing control, at least if you are in Field Marshal, and it is not a month later and they changed Marion Ostrom again, and now Heinz is what you expect. Let's say you're expecting control. Usually, Recon and Sickle aren't as good against German control, because they can have things like Sudden Strike, Flampanzer. They're able to avoid playing units early on to keep Sickles in your hand. But when you have both of them together, it becomes a little different, because if you play Recon and you Bloody Sickle your own Recon, which you know you can do because you're going first, then you're investing 2 cards and you're drawing 2 cards, and if he Sudden Strikes the Recon, he's going down 1 card on value. If he Flampanzers it, then that's not a great situation for you, but you still drew 2 cards for 2 cards, and he's using a greed cost greed retank, which isn't the greatest stat line with 2 operation cost. So really not the end of the world. So even though individually I wouldn't keep either of these 2 cards against German control, together I would keep them. Engineer Battalion, you're going to want to send back, because your life total isn't going to matter into German-Italy control, except maybe if they have a Comet, but it is way too early in the game to be worrying about that, especially when it's already a hard matchup and you need a really strong start out the gate. SU is a good keep into German-Italy control, however, because it's just an efficient unit you can get down pretty early. It can't be Sudden Striked, it can't be Flampanzered. They might have something like Lion for a day for it, but if they use that, then you're pretty happy. So let's go to the next example. You queue into Japan on ladder. Of course, Japan is almost always going to be Jagro. And here we see 3 of the cards that I said are pretty good cards in the early game, pretty often a keep. Winter Warfare is particularly good against Jagro, because they have so many 1 health threats. So And same goes for Bloody Sickle. These are the two best cards you can hope to have against Jagro. Red Dawn, however, not as many good targets in the early game. In sort of the mid game, you might be able to hit a Mito or a Shinhodo, but that's a little too far off in the future to hold it for, and you're taking a lot of damage, which is relevant in the Jagro matchup. So you wouldn't want to keep the Red Dawn in this situation. And against Jagro, that's one of the few matchups you might actually get rid of 34th guards. But because you already have 2 instances of self-damage in your hand you're going to keep, you're for sure going to keep the 34th guards. However, there have been times where I don't have any way to deal damage to myself in hand, and I throw back the 34th guards just because it's Jagro and they're so fast. And you don't really even need the big payoff at the end after a few turns to beat Jagro, because it's such a favorable matchup that you'd rather just have a consistent early game with lots of saves. Alright, now here you queue up against Germany again, and this time you're going second, and you have quite an interesting hand. 2 56 rifles, 2 34th guards, and a Red Dawn. What do you keep? So, from my perspective, 456 is a decent card against Germany, although they're able to slow it down pretty effectively in the early game. Red Dawn is okay. If they run out of Flampanzer on Greed, then it's incredible. But if your opponent is a smart control player, they aren't going to do that. So what I would actually do, I would send back 1 Red Dawn and 1 456. And that might seem a little strange. You're keeping so much that is reliant on self-damage, and you're throwing away your 1 instance of self-damage. But German Italy control players are going to avoid playing their cards as long as they can to slow you down. Their units, I mean, they'll play their discard and stuff, of course, and their removal. But I like to have 1 456 just for a 2-drop play. If they have Sudden Strike, whatever, you go 1 for 1. And you can trust that by the time they start playing units, by maybe turn 5, you are going to find the removal, the self-damage you need to get down your 34th guards pretty early into the mid-game, and this is the absolute best card you can have against German Italy control, because their removal options for it are relatively limited. Now, say you queue up against USA, that means one of 2 things. They are playing a frontline deck, or they are playing ramp, typically. They could be unitless, but if they're playing unitless, then haha, sorry for you. So here we have Zhukov, Bloody Sickle, Yak 7, and First Rifles. So this is a pretty polarizing one to see on ladder, because what you want to keep against frontline is very different from what you want to keep against ramp. Ramp is similar to control, where you want proactive stuff, just good units that are solid on their own, and less removal, because you won't be playing that removal until later on in the game, which slows down your development. So here, you'd probably keep the Bloody Sickle, because it is so good into frontline, and it's okay against ramp. Although if you knew for a fact it was ramp, you would send it back. And Zhukov and Yak are just incredible cards that you're going to want to keep. The only time you might not keep Zhukov is if you're into Jagro, and you just need the early answers early on so that you don't get burned out before you find your powerful things. And First Rifles, I would not keep. even though it's an absurd card, it is pretty much a 4K Green 9 guard, but better. Keeping a 4-drop turns out to be too slow, both into ramp and into mid-range. You are going to want to either being denying the front line for mid-range by that turn, or you want to be playing more aggressively statted units. And this one, I specifically said against air. Because Britain can be so many things. Let's assume you're in a tournament and you're playing against an air deck. Alright, so you have 3 of these cheap 1-cost removal that also deal damage to yourself. You have a T80 and you have an SU. What do you keep? Well, hopefully you've realized Winter Warfare is not going to really do anything against air, and it is more of a support card in this matchup for draw with things like Recon and Scouting Party. So you're going to send that back. Bloody Sickle gets a little more complicated, but I would also say to send that back, because it's just not going to kill anything on its own. And if it's not killing anything on its own, then it's awkward in the early game. You're not going to be sure when to use it. You don't have a 34th guards in your hand to synergize with it, so you're going to send that back as well. But you will keep the Red Dawn, because their deck is almost all 1-3s. You are going second with this hand, you have 5 cards, so you are able to immediately remove a 1-drop Gret as soon as they play it, which can also help you lead into your T80 on turn 2 with the goal of farming 2 units. And then would you keep the SU, seeing as that's a 3-drop to go along with that? I would not. It's a little too late into the game at that point to keep it in your mulligan, I think, and a little too ambitious against a deck where you are fighting for board control right away. I would send it back and look more for answers if your plan doesn't work out in the early game. Say they found an albacore to pin your T80 when you played it. SU will not be the ideal card in that circumstance, so I would send it back as well. So that's just a small sampling, of course, but hopefully you get the main concepts of thinking about what cards specifically they are playing in the early game, and thinking of what is particularly powerful against those threats, and also getting the ideas of having more independent threats to go against control and late game decks, and reactive early game removal against decks that are also aggressive. I hope you enjoyed the video, and thanks for watching.